This is Better Under Pressure with me, Sara Milne Rowe, the podcast where successful people share what they do to thrive under pressure. I think there's going to be an identity pressure. Leaders are going to need to know who they are. As AI comes in, I think all that's going to do is to reveal the leadership gaps more than ever. So whatever you could get away with before is now going to be revealed much, much more quickly. Mm-hmm. And I think all of us are going to have ways to honour our interiority. Not inferiority, interiority. All of the stuff that actually sits and we know to be true for us. I think the quality of presence and connection is going to be even more important. I think at the moment we've got a lot of leaders optimizing for productivity, which obviously has to happen in a business. But I think there's going to be a much needed desire for leaders who are optimizing for depth of contact, connection, and letting people know who they are and what they stand for. Bit of a change this episode as the interviewer becomes the interviewee. Yep, today I'm being put in the hot seat by my friend and fellow coach, Nicky Brown. I've known Nicky for about 5 years. She's been a leader in iconic organisations like Nike and Apple, and now works with elite performers across business as well as sports like football and Formula One to help them become unshakable, which happens to be the name of her business too. It was Nicky who suggested the spotlight should be turned on me, and this interview is the result.
Role reversal time, Sara Milne Rowe. So after 2.5 years of you interviewing fabulous leaders across the globe around what pressure means to them and how they perform under pressure, today the spotlight is on you. How exciting.
Woo! Here we go. No, it's really exciting actually. A, because I'm doing it with you, and B, it just gives me some time to really reflect on what I see, what I feel, realizing more and more about what pressure, how pressure shows up, what people do in it, when it's positive, when it's less positive, all of those things. So, after 2.5 years, it's a real delight actually, Nicky, to sit down and have this opportunity. So thank you for offering to do it.
Well, the pleasure is all mine. So let's jump straight in. How would you describe pressure?
So I actually love a bit of pressure, which you won't be surprised to hear. And partly I love it because it just pushes me in a healthy way to achieve more than I thought I could do in the first place. And that's been the pattern that I've experienced mostly throughout my life. I think it is, it's a different energy from stress. I think pressure for me is an action-oriented energy that you feel primarily, or I do, and I think most people do, feel primarily in their body. And it's sort of like a signal to say, okay, there's some action required here. And on the whole, for me, it's been a very positive energy, and it has really stretched me and increased me and expanded me. So that's how I'd explain and describe pressure. Although I think there are certain components in pressure that show up, and some decide to take the leading stage light before the other. And I've really been noticing it through this podcast, which comes to the forefront first. And normally it's saying to me, it's important, Sara. Or it's saying, there's something at stake here, Sara. Or it's saying, this could be long term. And I think this sort of combination of important, and also there's another bit in there that's about responsibility, that it feels like it's I'm responsible for something. And there's other people or other things dependent on my ability to manage it. So that's sort of how I'd explain the ingredients and my relationship with pressure.
And for somebody that's so connected to not only their mind, their heart, you're really in touch with your body. How do you notice when pressure is present for you? You talked there about you hear a voice saying this may be important. Yeah. How else do you track it?
It's always a physical feeling first. And for me, it can play out in a sort of flush or a sort of fluttering or bodily sensation that makes me feel okay. And again, if it's an immediate pressure, it can be short term or it can be long term, and I'm really interested in that. And I think it's the long term pressure that most of my clients, most of the people that I work with find the hardest, because I think most of us can respond to a pressure and it can be over quickly. And actually, that's what we're made to do anyway. We're made to respond to short-term pressure and to feel that we can actually survive and thrive in that moment. I think what's happening now is this long-term, slow seepage of pressure that just sits in your body all the time. And that's different, I think. And that's when pressure can go into stress. And I think the two are very different. But I think, unfortunately, many of us, and particularly leaders in high challenge situations, have overridden the physical signs that their body has told them, to the extent that then it becomes a normal pattern, which ultimately then can lead to extreme fatigue and extreme burnout. It's making sure that you stay alert and aware and in tune with your body and your relationship with pressure. And I'm really conscious also, Nicky, that my relationship with pressure, and my children have taught me this quite significantly, is potentially more... it's not the same as theirs. And I think this is, again, what I see a lot in the clients that I work with, is that their interpretation of pressure, or their ability to manage it actually, may not be the same as somebody else's that they're leading. And so their expectations are too much maybe for a particular person, as opposed to pacing and leading them. Pacing them and leading them to the next stage. And I think, again, if we're not aware of that ourselves, then the pressure is ruling us, as opposed to us managing and relating to the pressure energy. Yeah.
I loved what you talked about there around the short-term pressure that can feel easy. It can almost feel like adrenaline as well, right? And it can fuel us. And ultimately, it is about the relationship we have with the pressure that it does become fuel. But we do not ignore, and we do listen to the body or the wisdom that's within, and then we find our own practices to move through when pressure's here. But you also talked there about noticing on the long-term pressure and how you are able to be with that. What is an example of a long-term pressure that you have led through and been able to hold and use it to the same energy and fuel that you have as the short-term daily pressures that we may face?
Personal?
Yeah.
I think the biggest pressure that plays out for me, Nicky, is family pressure. Is when somebody in my family is under pressure or is needing attention, and I'm also working and running, and I know that this is very common for many people. But I can think of two examples. One was when my mother was dying, and that was sort of, all of us experienced this at some point, but it wasn't a short death, it was a long death, or a long demise anyway. And so having that, it was like having that as a constant just noise in one's head, sense that there's something always there that you can't see. For me, I'm such a control freak, and I'll say that out loud to anyone who's listening to this. My relationship with control has been the biggest pressure for me, and my family have taught me the most in that regard, because anyone with any children knows that ultimately there comes a point where you cannot control your children. And they don't want you to. So, and you can't control death, and you can't control illness, or other people's experience of it. That's when I'm mostly under long-term pressure, is when there are things that I want to fix and I can't. I find that really hard. I still find that really hard. And so trying to keep that sort of measured and just a little drumbeat in the back of me, and at the same time perform when I need to. And I have a very clear sense of what I mean by performance, and I love performance. It's been at the heart of my life, both in theatre, dance and music, as well as now with the high performance work that I do in organisations. And performance is a devotion. And I get slightly irritated when people talk about everything being a performance, because anyone who has really performed at a high level knows just how much devotion, discipline, love that takes. And so I prefer to use the word performative when people often use the word performance. And performative is when it's false and it's not authentic and you're trying to fit in. That's my definition of those two interpretations of performance. And so trying to perform in moments where you know you need to be on your best game, and you know this working with the elite sportsmen and women that you work with, there are stuff going on in their family life and they still have to turn up for the game and they still have to show their best, their best performance. So it's sort of an example of that, although I'm not tipping up to play, a massive game, but I am tipping up to be fully in service to my clients. And when you've got something else like, a child deeply in pain or dealing with something very difficult long term, or a mother that's dying, that's when the two, short term and long term, sit together.
And what I'm hearing here is, and thank you for really letting us in with you, Sarah, because you're so used to going in with others. So it's really lovely to get to know you on a much deeper level. What I'm hearing here is the awareness around your relationship with control and not judging it, but using it as a way to own it from a vulnerable space, get curious with it, and continue to expand your capacity to surrender control for anything external from you. And that the family have been a gorgeous lesson. But I also hear that you have the ability, when the pressure is on over here, but you need to step into performance, you can compartmentalize that pressure, although it's still there and you still may have connection to it. You're able to compartmentalize to do what you need to do and then return to nourish self when you need to go back to that pressure environment.
I do actually. I had a very, very good training in that when I was a teacher. I do believe that was I call it my unintentional MBA in self-leadership. Because I learn, and what is incredible about being in a tough, challenging, comprehensive is that you don't have any opportunity to recover in a way from a bad lesson. And, in my 20s, I had many of them. And then the next class is waiting at the door, right? So you have like a split second to shift your state from something that didn't go very well to being fully available to somebody at the door. And this is so relevant, I think, to leaders and people are dealing with this sort of constant one challenge after another challenge after another challenge, is this ability to take a moment and choose. And I learned that by mistake, but it was through that process that I started to think, actually, there's something I'm doing here that I'm not fully in my conscious awareness of. And if I brought it into my conscious awareness, what is it that I'm actually doing to shift my state from this class to another class? I think I told you, it's written in my book actually, but Wayne, God bless Wayne, wherever you are now, 40-year-old
You
Wayne.
should try and connect with Wayne and let him know the impact that he's had on your life teaching.
He did have a huge impact, although I wouldn't have talked about it in such a positive way then as I do now. But
we never do in the moment, do we? But trust there will be a gift in it. That's part of the magic.
Yeah. And for anyone hearing this who doesn't know, this was a year 9 class and I was teaching Elizabethan drama. Now, in hindsight, why the hell I was teaching Elizabethan drama to a year 9 class, majority of people who didn't have any intention of choosing drama for a GCSE. And also, it was a very mixed class with all sorts of different personal challenges, all sorts of different languages, all sorts of different desires and relationships that existed in that class of 30. Anyway, I'd been trained to do a beautifully put together lesson, which I was trying to follow as a young teacher. And at one point, now I'm going to swear now, I'm just going to tell you, but at one point, Wayne looked up and said, "Miss," and I said, "Yeah." He said, "This lesson's fucking boring." And at that moment, I mean, I can still feel it as I say it now, but my stomach dropped out of the bottom of me. I know I went red. My body was in total turmoil for what felt like an eternity, which was probably just a few seconds. But the thing that automatically, Nicky, came in at that moment was a breathing technique that I had been taught by my violin teacher when I was 15 years old to manage the intensity of violin exams. because the violin is an instrument that's incredibly sensitive. And if you are in any way nervous, the bow will pick it up. Your fingers are playing it, and it's you and the examiner. There's no orchestra behind you. So it's very revealing as an instrument. And believe me, if you don't play it very well, the violin, it doesn't sound remotely nice. And so there's a lot of pressure. And without even thinking in that moment, my breath came in. A breath training that actually said, right, just calm down. Just don't try and cover this. Just get yourself back into a moment of choice. And that moment, I mean, I can feel it now, and it was so many years ago, but it gave me such great intelligence around when you drill something out of pressure, when you are in pressure, it will automatically kick in for you. And that gave me a moment of time to be able to respond to Wayne in a way that was fundamental to the change in that relationship with that classroom going forward. And I said to him, Wayne, I didn't get up this morning with the intention to be fucking boring. I probably wouldn't be able to say that now, actually, as a teacher, but that is what I did say at the time. Tell me how I can make this lesson more interesting for you. Heart, pump, 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 legs shaking, temperature up, all of that. 29 other year 9, 14, 15-year-old faces looking at me and Wayne. So suddenly we had like a tennis match. What's he going to do? What's she going to do? What's he going to do? What's she going to do? And what happened was he didn't know how to respond to that question because he's so used to being told to get out the classroom, to be shouted at, to be excluded, because that was his normality. So in that moment, I had disrupted a pattern for him by managing myself well enough to be calm enough to lean in and be genuinely curious and be prepared for whatever he might say in answer to that question. But actually what transpired is we had a really deep conversation as a class around what does make a lesson and why do they want to learn? What do they want to learn? And how does it make a difference to their life? It ended up being an existential discussion on the purpose of education and why it mattered to them. So it was really, really fascinating. But I've never, ever forgotten that moment. And that is the moment that allowed me to really think about what is the mechanism to shift state. How can you shift state? And breath will actually always, always buy you a moment of choice and return you to neutral. And it's whether you can allow yourself that moment of choice when you're in a boardroom, when you're in a difficult client, or whether you've got a difficult customer, or you've got a difficult team member, or any of those difficult moments. Can you honor yourself enough to take a moment to just breathe for a second, steady, and choose? So that this is a very long-winded way of telling you that those 13 years in education, in difficult, challenging classrooms, I'm forever grateful for, because I learned so much about me, about what makes people in a great state to learn, because ultimately that's what leadership is. How do you maximize the collective power of a group of very different people? How do you onboard people? We were working at the time when there were a lot of refugee status children being flown in overnight. I think I did a little test when I with a class that I had from year 7 to year 11, how many of the original members of the class were still there in year 11. And there were 6 out of a class of 30. So the turnover was immense because they were often being housed somewhere else in the country. But again, when you think about onboarding, and now more than ever, because you don't really have a solid team in its shape for much longer than a year if you're lucky at the moment, because people are moving so fast. It's a leadership responsibility to onboard and get someone in a team as fast. And it must happen. It happens in sport all the time, doesn't it? How do you fast form a team so that the collective energy of that pressure becomes really energizing and everyone's behind it? That's a real skill.
100%. You know what I really pulled out? I was scribbling notes as you were talking. The bit that I feel I'll really stand out from what you said, other than Wayne's whole approach to having the courage and the bravery, and although he may have a pattern of how he did it and it felt disruptive, but it was the word choice. You and everyone can choose how they respond to a pressured moment or pressure in general. And that's the relationship to it. When you talked about the question that you asked back to him, that wasn't my intention to be fucking boring. Let's explore that, right?
Yeah.
You empowered him. And there's a leadership lesson in here, because what would have been easy, Sarah, is for your ego to kick in and get defensive and kick him out the class. How dare you speak to me that way? You need to show respect, right? Which is true. There is a respect piece there. But actually what you did is you empowered him and you got curious to say, okay, well, tell me what needs to change for this not to be how it's being received. And there is something so golden in that. And the other bit is when you were talking about, going back and forth like the tennis match. Yeah. But there was a real moment of self-trust for you that you could handle whatever came back. And it was all happening live in the moment. So you didn't have time in between a meeting, take a pause, I'm going to go for a walk. It was live, but there was a real rootedness and self-trust in I can be with whatever comes back over the net back towards me.
Yeah. I think that rootedness and self-trust is hugely underestimated, and also the speed at which people are operating right now. Right. They don't give themselves enough space or intention to connect to that.
Practices, because the breath.
Or the practices,
That take seconds to do.
I agree. And I'm talking more and more about the power of spirit and discipline, because I think that's ultimately what lay in this experience for me. It was the spirit to believe that I genuinely could hold that space in that pressure and lean into Wayne and invite him back in a different form, one that he wasn't really used to. And also the discipline of the breathing that I had drilled, for like 10 years automatically came in. And I think this combination is really, really important, and you need both of them. And I think when, there's a lot of people at the moment holding their nerve. I've got probably about 4 clients, partly to do with the situation of the war, but there's a lot of holding their nerve because they don't really know what the outcome of much is right now. So, but you're still leading and you're still required to make decisions and you're still required to lead people. So how do you hold your nerve? And I think these two elements of spirit and discipline are entwined in that, because when belief is alive internally, energy flows externally. And I think that's what you're talking about in terms of rootedness. And a lot of the work that I do is how to wake leaders up to their own belief for what is their choice in this situation. They may not be able to control all the external pieces, but what can they control, and what do they actually believe about it? Even if the belief is, I believe we can hold this unknown space right now and still carry on delivering in the areas that we can. It's channeling that internal belief so that externally it becomes contagious and it travels beyond you. And because belief isn't static, it moves and you can feed it. And that is where the discipline comes in, because you have to feed belief. You have to remember what it is. I think that's one of the biggest things I've learned about myself, is the story I'm telling myself around this situation. And is it helping belief or is it depleting my belief? And if it's depleting my belief, you can bet that I will be having an adverse effect on other people around me, including myself.
Right.
So this is very strange, doing an observational insight on my own podcast, observing me as a guest. But anyway, here goes. I wanted to just reflect a little more on what I was saying there about spirit and discipline. Now, I'm really conscious that both these words raise different things for different people, but I've seen them play a key role in building our capacity for dealing with pressure. When I talk about spirit, I'm talking about the power of meaning and its ability to redirect our energy away from focusing on the pressure and onto what fundamentally matters. What makes the pressure worth it or not? This might mean pausing for a minute and asking either yourself or others involved, why does this actually matter to me? And when you start to allow yourself to talk about that out loud, it can emerge in a full and expansive way. I've also noticed when I'm working with people that it goes beyond just what they're saying. The whole body gets involved when someone talks about something that really matters. The tone changes, the body moves, the facial expressions shift, and the meaning becomes more substantial as it gets articulated. And then it heightens the motivation to take action, irrespective of the pressure. The pressure is no longer the focus. But spirit on its own can fade, so it does need some discipline wrapped around it. For me, discipline means devotion. It's about saying, I stand for that. That actually matters to me. Therefore, I'm going to commit to a behaviour or a practice to keep harnessing the energy of pressure in a way that works for me. Spirit ignited by discipline can support you through the pressure of a challenge. So here are a few questions that I play with when I want to ignite my spirit and sharpen my discipline and commitment. What fires me up at the moment? What do I wish was talked about more? What can I talk about for hours right now because it makes me feel alive? And what environment do I need to spend more time in because the energy really enlivens me? What am I currently practicing, either intentionally or not? And that one is a great reminder for me to check in with what I'm doing regularly but is actually now outdated. What used to serve me but now doesn't. In fact, what's wasting, draining, or even distracting my energy and intention? That can be people, by the way, as well. And finally, what can I experiment with more fully and deliberately because I know that it's important to the way I show up?
I'm like this the whole way through this conversation, as you know. It's like stepping people into unshakable self-belief is my baby, and actually it's a deep knowing and being able to tap into that knowing even when you don't know the path or you don't know the outcome.
Long-term pressure, Nicky, can be very toxic. Right. If you as the leader doesn't choose to note and mark the progress. I think this is when I was talking to someone this morning who's under a huge amount of pressure and loads of challenge, and there's so little appreciation going around that organization. There's so little moments of celebration going on in that organization, and it's becoming a toxic pressure to keep relentlessly delivering. And that's not how humans work. No. And I think what happens is we get caught up, though, if we slow down and celebrate our successes and understand it or mine our successes, we're somehow going too slow to keep up with the pace of which has been dictated externally anyway. So they're not in control of the choices that they're making. And they're underestimating, in my view, the power of connecting to success and what is working. And I think that's the way to handle long-term pressure, is to make sure that you're stopping at regular points to acknowledge progress. And progress is a human imperative. And sometimes actually progress is endurance, but at least honour it.
100%. 100%. It's interesting you say this, because I had a client this week who's under, like, you could almost call it crisis at the moment in what's happening within that team. And he had a really important meeting this week where he wanted to go in and be like, not good enough, we're under pressure. If we don't do this, it could go beyond crisis. We may not be here. And actually, to your point, to get the client to pause and say, you're right, all of that is true.
Yeah.
And whilst this is true, we are in a crisis. I've got no doubt that this is the right team to get us out of this.
Exactly.
And let's put energy here in what's possible, rather than we're already feeling beaten and the energy shifts into inspirational, motivational, let's go energy. So the pressure becomes fuel.
Yeah. And I think there are two things in that example that are really worth highlighting, is the power of the communication of the narrative around the pressure. And in my view, there's not enough space or time being made to really, really think and prepare that, so that it becomes what we often call a consistent drumbeat to get us into delivering through the pressure. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, your client needed a practice to prepare his state to do that. So often it's one or the other, or one's completely ignored at the expense of the other. And so you do get leaders standing up talking about what's going on, but it's seeping and what I would say leaking their own pressure or their own anxiety. And it's really, really apparent to people when a leader is leaking something. So the discipline of his preparation, and then the discipline of his ability to create a story that actually galvanizes the energy in the room. And so the pressure becomes that positive energy pressure that we talked about before, but it takes discipline.
It does. And practice, right? And
practice,
practice of repetition, of leading in that way for self and others. Do you know where I'd love to go next, Sarah, is because we're talking about pressure when it arrives, when it's here. We've spent
Yeah.
a lot of time talking about. For me, there's another type of pressure that we anticipate. I'm feeling forward. I
Yeah.
know I'm going into an event or a
Yeah.
situation or a conversation where I am anticipating the pressure is going to come at me. And it has the same visceral reaction as if when I'm in it. And I would love to spend a little bit of time together talking about this feel forward pressure.
Yeah. The phrase I love is anticipate to mitigate. So, what is on the horizon that you could actually add more value than at the moment you're appreciating you can, is a great way into working, I think, with leaders who have got huge calendars, busy back to back, and they haven't isolated those moments where actually that's a possible opportunity that does hold pressure, but I could add a huge amount of value there. So, I mean, this to me is like, how do you rehearse, how do you prepare to go on stage? It's like there's a preparation element in this. And unfortunately, in organizations, often the word rehearsal gets, in my view, very bad press because they see it as a soft skill to do with performing, which they mean performative, or they think it's false. And actually performing can be really real. And I always quote Judi Dench on this, who says, acting is not about putting on masks, it's about peeling off layers. And I think that is what leaders often can rehearse to allow themselves to be fully themselves and be able to turn up and show all of themselves in a way that inspires and invigorates others. And it does need preparation and it does need rehearsal. And the most common phrase I hear, Nicky, is if I over prepare, it doesn't work. I just don't think you can over prepare. What I think they have done is they've prepared up to a certain point and then they've thought, right, now I'm ready, but they're actually not ready. They're in that midway point where they've started to prepare, but they don't fully know it. It's a bit like going on stage with a text that you half know and someone takes the book away and says, off you go. I mean, terrifying. Terrifying.
So how would you take a leader from, how would they know they're only half prepared, and what would you do with them or recommend for them to get to your point to be the greatest of all time once they step on stage? And stage could be the boardroom, it could be, a town hall.
I'd get them to say it to me. So often they'll say, I'm not going to do any more preparation. I'm ready. I go, okay, great. So let's have a go. What are you going to say? Open this meeting. I can remember being with a very, very large team actually in Brazil. And we had one day with the exec team before doing a big piece of work with the 80 leaders down. And we said, right, we're going to be rehearsing that day. And they absolutely thought we were mad and also hated the idea of it and really was the most cynical. And by the end of it, they said, my God, if we hadn't have done that, this would have been a car crash. And it's not because they don't know how. I think it's because they don't see the relevance until they do it. It does take preparation and it does take some really useful questions. Like, what do you want them to do as a result of this? And often they don't know the answer to that. And if you're going to be having a value and you're going to add some impact, it's worth knowing what it is that you want people to what are you causing through this effort? I mean, for a lot of your sports clients, it's like, we're going to win, right? So, okay, so that's the do. You are going to win the championship. We're going to win something. Okay, so how do you want them to feel? How do you want the people you're doing it for to feel? And that's, again, a question that most people don't really interrogate. Whereas emotion, for me, there's motion at the heart of the word emotion, which means movement, which means people will move with you. And this is like what you do with a text. Just to say something, to take the text off the page so it lives. And I think leaders are going to need to move people through their articulation more and more. It's a human, quintessentially human storytelling approach needed as more technology comes into our world. And that takes practice, but it also takes ignition to belief and really helping someone find out, why does that matter? And who will benefit? If they can't answer either of those two questions, they're not ready, Nicky.
So much wisdom in that. So much. Here's another lens that I have on feeling forward with pressure. Because I often feel, and what I see, whether it's with leaders or athletes, is the meaning that they're putting behind the pressure. And you talked about that as we were talking about the last question. If you're able to feel forward of what is the worst that can happen. I did this with an athlete yesterday. What's the worst that can happen? And he was like, it actually becomes quite comical when you're like, oh my goodness, how silly is that when you get to the answer of that? And it's like, okay, so from here, what do you want to do?
Yeah.
Now I want to go. Turning what was perceived pressure into fuel.
I think that's right. In fact, I've had quite a few guests on Better Under Pressure who have said, as a pay forward, what is the worst that can happen? And that's helped them. My only caveat with that, there are some people that you will ask that question to, and they can get sucked down into the catastrophe of the worst case scenario. And emotionally, it impacts their ability to lift themselves out again. So they confirm the bias by actually bringing the worst case scenario vividly to mind. It's about knowing the client that's in front of you as to what is going to be most useful or helpful there. But I would say that that's very helpful for people who are pretty strong.
Yeah, I think it's the ability to be what work they've done around their emotional capacity, or if they've got somebody that can really build that expansion of capacity with them. Because you're right. It depending on where your mind likes to go. If you're somebody that can fall into the victim trap, and then that fuels you, which is what you're describing, then that wouldn't be the right way for them.
Precisely.
Okay, so you talked about breath. What other favorite practices do you have for people that want to become better under pressure?
I think you need to know how you recover. So, I mean, obviously, I wrote the book called The Shed Method, and shed is there. But I sort of think there are two bookends to that question. One is, do you have the fuel, i.e. sleep, hydration, exercise, diet, also movement, rest? Because I think there's micro and macro moments to shed or to your fuel. Like, what can you do in this moment? I've got 90 seconds between this meeting and another one. What can I do in that 90 seconds that is enough for me to reboot myself? So that's, tiny. And then there's the longer term shed, which is what's my goal for my movement? What's my goal for actually putting great food in my body? What's my goal for sleep? And again, it's so individual. And it may not be any of those four things that make the biggest difference, but there's something around the basic honoring of fuel, replenishment, nourishment for yourself before you can actually deal with any pressure. I mean, sometimes I'm in front of a client and I just want to say to them, you need to go to bed for 2 solid days, right? We can't work through this problem right now because you're in no physical state to do that. And that's what worries me the most, is that we are getting very good at overriding that.
Yeah.
In some level, on some level.
Will you end a session with somebody if you feel that's the best and really ask them to go home and go to bed?
Yeah.
That's gorgeous, because that's courageous, right? Where you're not using your word before, you're not there to be performative for them. You are fully in service for the transformation that they're looking for. And if that transformation is vastly uncomfortable for them, you're good to play in that space. Yeah.
And it's also making it very acutely obvious that is part of performance. Your ability to nourish and fuel yourself is an absolutely vital part of performance. And then the other bookend is purpose. So it's purpose energy, it's belief, it's understanding why it matters to you. And so the practice involved in that, I've got little quotes on my computer in front of me here that just fuel me, or things that I know really matter to me. They're there. They need to be really visible to you, or having things that are actually around you. Like we had one client that literally had a little picture rail in his office, and he had little things across the top. No one would know, other than if you work with him personally, that there are things there that he looks at and he says, that means that to me. And okay, so it's back to those two questions again of, why does this matter and who's going to benefit? So the purpose also is a really useful one, I think, that practices beyond self-interest. So why does the way I deal with this pressure matter to me? But more importantly, who will benefit and why does it matter to someone beyond me or the world or this organization or something, that the ripple effects that actually by me holding tight to this pressure and working with the pressure and turning it into an energy for good, I am causing something for good. So those two bookends I think are important. Earlier, when I was talking about purpose energy, I mentioned that I have a few things around me that help boost me when I want to ignite a bit of spirit and meaning for myself. This is another example of a light discipline practice, so I thought I'd share a few now. Firstly, I love to wear jewellery that has words on it. I love to feel them close to my skin. One of the pieces I have is a ring. Now, I had no intention of buying this ring when I went into a shop in Toronto, but the sales assistant said, "Oh, I've got just the ring for you." Great sales technique, but actually it turns out she was right. The ring has an inscription on it that says, "Everything you need is within." And I find this so powerful. I just have to look at it or feel it on my hand, and it can return me to me. I also have little post-its on my computer with various quotes on them. Some of them are recent ones, but there are also a few that have been there and have stood the test of time for me. And when I'm working, I can just glance up at these and they remind me of a bigger and more useful perspective. And finally, I have found myself over the course of my life collecting a series of headless statues, all shapes and sizes. I didn't really know why I was attracted to them then, but I was. And it's only much more recently that I see them as a powerful nudge to remember to get out of my own head. So, have a think. What 2 or 3 things might be worth you seeing or feeling on a regular basis so that you can more intentionally connect to your purpose energy? Other practices is the story you're telling. I mean, going back to managing your mood, mindset's talked a lot about, but not so much mood set. And I think mood set is important. And I think often we can fall victim to feeling that our mood is bossing us as opposed to us having a choice to choose our mood. Mm-hmm. And I know that sometimes gets pushed back because if you're feeling something, allow yourself to feel it. I agree, allow yourself to feel it. But at what point do you enable yourself, I'm talking about, to go, okay, now it's turning into something that is depleting me and it's not helping me anymore. How can I move it through into a little moment of progress that makes me feel that I'm able to do something on that through my own choice? So I think forward focused language is really helpful when it comes to pressure or when it comes to high challenge. And words like don't, there's actually quite a lot about don't theory. You know, the more you say don't, the more you want to. I mean, there's that whole thing, isn't it, with children, don't fall off the wall, and then they do. Yeah. So how do you apply that to yourself? As opposed to say, don't do that, Sarah, stop doing that, don't do, as opposed to stay focused, write one sentence, or the little things that actually keep you forward focused. And one more thing I'd throw in here, I think having a support network is so crucial. Knowing who your people are, who your tribe is, that actually can hold you, know you for who you are and can support you, and they make you just feel alive or they make you laugh. So that's sort of your personal network. And then there's also, what support system do you need around you to enable you to do what you are wanting to do? Like, do you have someone to care for your children when you're not there? Do you have someone who, if you're lucky enough to be able to pay for someone to clean your house? But also the other thing is your EA or your PA or whoever's in support of you and your diary. I do a lot of meetings with clients and their EAs to say, what are your conditions for success? And how can this person really help you honour them? And make sure that they're carved out in your diary and you don't override them. Who is that? In our company, we often call about, who's your court jester as well? Who's the person, like in Shakespeare, you always had a court jester who told you what was really going on in the court. Right? So who's your court jester who's actually going to tell you what's happening in real time, in real words, so that you can choose how you are in that. So there's so many, but I feel like those two bookends are crucial. And then you choose where you need to apply the attention.
Good. And I want to say the Shared Methods book is a timeless book that if people haven't read, they have to, because it is that staple. So
Thank you,
I've got a
Nicky.
couple more questions, Sarah. Our world is changing faster than it ever has. And I'm really curious, what do you project pressure will look like in organizations specifically within the next year or two?
I think there's going to be an identity pressure. I think leaders are going to need to know who they are. As AI, as technology comes in, I think all that's going to do is to reveal the leadership gaps more than ever. So whatever you could get away with before is now going to be revealed much, much more quickly. And I think that all of us are going to have ways to honor our interiority, not inferiority, interiority, all of the stuff that actually sits and we know to be true for us. I think the quality of presence and connection is going to be even more important. I think at the moment we've got a lot of leaders optimizing for productivity, which obviously has to happen in a business. But I think there's going to be a much needed desire for leaders who are optimizing for depth of contact and connection and letting people know who they are and what they stand for. It's sort of what makes us quintessentially human, I think is going to matter more and more as technology and speed of change happens all the time. So I think that's one. And I think the other pressure is going to be back to recovery. And when I say recovery, I think it's also about nourishment, because you could argue that there's going to be more opportunity for your own nourishment, maybe. I think there's some decoupling from our identity to work, who we are, that's going to be really important. And so understanding what makes you come alive, what lights you up, all of that is going to, I think, going to matter more and more as the pressure of AI and technology comes in. And I think there's going to be a need for it. I think there's going to be a need for feeding your spirit and honoring the human in this development. And if you don't know who you are, it's going to be a problem.
100%. And also, like, how do you hold uncertainty? Because there's so much that's coming, and not only pressure that you feel, but pressure that the team feel as organizations shift and evolve. Like, knowing who you are, both on a self and an organizational level, doing the right thing rather than what I believe to be right from an ego place, right? And this place around, can I hold uncertainty from a rooted place, and linking that to everything you've just said. And you talk a lot about spirit. I know that's something that you're massively passionate about.
Yeah. And I think to your point about uncertainty, I think the pressure of not knowing is going to hit big time. Yeah. It already is.
Yeah, I was just about to say already. Yeah.
You know, it's already, and leaders don't like not to know.
Yeah.
So how do you do that? And I was listening to something yesterday, which was just talking around how important decisions are for people to feel relevant, and that people are more likely to make an inefficient decision, possibly even a negative decision, rather than say they don't know. Mm-hmm. And that came from the uncertainty experts, by the way, if anyone's interested. There's some super research coming out in a white paper about decision making and uncertainty that they have put together. So it's worth a look at.
Okay, next question, quick fire.
Yes.
You ask every person that comes on your podcast this, so we're going to put it back to you. What are 2 things that you would pay forward around performance under pressure for the listeners to this episode?
There's a lot talked about slowing down. Slow down to go faster, slow down to go smoother. I would like to recommend slow down and shut down.
Ooh.
I'm learning this myself, that actually I need to shut down, shut off, like the same way as turning off your phone, because even slowing down, I can get interrupted and there can be distractions coming in. But I've really been practicing with this idea of shutting down and not doing anything. and just being with myself. And it's really hard.
It is hard.
But when I do it, magical things happen. And again, this goes back to the trusting of your interior, your interiority, to know that there's so much inner wisdom for all of us, however important we are, whatever our role, we still need to be in touch with our interiority. And I think that will be the sort of gold dust that will be sprinkled alongside what's coming, and it's already developing. So in order to do that, we need to not just slow down, we need to shut down and have ways of shutting down, would be one.
Love that.
And the second one is asking those two questions. I know I've mentioned it already, but when you get into a moment of pressure, just slow down enough. And that is when you do need to just pause or slow down and ask, why does this matter? And really write it down. I think there's something about clarifying the answer to that question in a sentence that you write down. Why does this actually matter? And then the second question, who will benefit if I deal with this pressure really, really well, in a way that honors myself and other people around me? So I think there's some real magic and intention in those two questions that embrace both spirit and discipline and require you to be really clear with yourself by writing it down.
Gorgeous practices. And a little cheeky question to finish us off today, Sarah.
Before you ask me that, I just also wanted to say something I read something yesterday which I think is really worthwhile placing in this conversation. It was a little piece of research that said, due to the increasing amount of screen time and technology and sitting down that we are all getting caught up in, we are developing what this woman, Gloria Marx, her name is, and I thought it was such a great phrase. It was called continuous partial attention. And I thought, well, this is why I think learning how to shut down is really important, because otherwise you think you're going slower, but actually there's this continuous partial attention to half conversations, half reading things, starting something, going down a rabbit hole, starting to put the wash on, stopping and then making something. Like, I don't know about you, but sometimes I've got something like 15 tabs open in my head. And I think the same is happening for all of us.
Yeah.
So this idea of continuous partial attention really does need to be addressed. So just want to land that in there.
Yeah, I was putting my hands up. I'm like, I'm totally guilty of this, especially when the day is busy and it's like, right. Okay, I want to sneak peek behind the curtain, because you are always working on the most magical, innovative, forward-thinking projects. So give us a sneak peek. Let us in.
Well, I'm writing a second book, which is actually in essence a lot of the things that we've talked about here, but in a bit more, it's really honoring spirit and discipline, which is exciting and very clarifying for me. And I'm also doing a lot of work with someone based in the States, looking very deeply into the work with AI and sovereign AI. And she wants us to work alongside her on looking at what's this going to require of leadership. So we're doing some really interesting discussions with leaders across sectors, across organizations, to understand this relationship between increased AI technology to improve productivity and efficiency, and what this is going to require of leaders. What is the humanity required to sit alongside AI in a way that feels really, really positive and optimized, that these two things come together, and that we hold on to our human agency and understand what are the human qualities that actually make a difference when you're leading other people and leading yourself, which is going to be even more important. That's what I'm playing with and loving, actually. It's really stretching me.
Really juicy and needed innovative projects. Okay, how do you want to close this out?
Nicky, thank you so much for jumping into that seat. It's been incredibly interesting, me sitting in this seat and answering those questions. And I know in a way, I feel like there's ghosts of all of the other guests that have sat in this seat that have been here today in this, because I've had pictures of people who've said things that have brought something to mind. So, it's sort of in the spirit of great gratitude I have right now. A, being given this opportunity, but B, to all of the other people that have gone before me in this seat who have kept this discussion alive and fueled and moving forward. So yeah, it's been fabulous. Thank you so much.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine. I feel like we could have gone for hours more. So thank you for giving me this privilege.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Better Under Pressure with me, Sara Milne Rowe. If you enjoyed it, please do subscribe and let us know what you found useful or what you'd like to know more about. And don't forget, if you'd like to sign up for our fortnightly Pressure Points newsletter, where I summarise key points from each conversation, you can find a link at saramilnerowe.com. If you're interested in any of the practices mentioned, check out my book, The Shed Method. Alternatively, you can find us at Coaching Impact or me on LinkedIn and Instagram. Better Under Pressure was produced by the fab team at Smart Cookie Media. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, goodbye.